I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd sniff her husband's collar like some desperate detective in a bad movie. But there I was, standing in our bedroom at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, holding Marcus's jacket up to my face, breathing in the unmistakable scent of perfume that definitely wasn't mine. My perfume was light, citrusy, the kind you'd wear to a PTA meeting. This was heavy, musky, the kind that clung to fabric and announced itself when you walked into a room. My hands were shaking as I held that jacket. We'd been married for 14 years. 14 years of building a life together. Of mortgage payments and parent-teacher conferences. Of arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash and making up over takeout Chinese food. We had 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, a golden retriever named Biscuit. We were supposed to be solid. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he'd hugged a coworker. Maybe someone had bumped into him on the subway. Maybe I was being paranoid, letting my insecurities get the best of me. I'd put on some weight after the kids. My hair had more gray than I cared to admit. The laugh lines around my eyes had stopped being cute and started looking like my mother's. But Marcus always said he loved me exactly as I was. He wouldn't. He couldn't. Then I felt something in the pocket. A piece of paper, folded small and tight. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears as I pulled it out and unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was loopy, feminine, done in purple ink. 5 words that shattered my entire world. Thanks for last night, Daddy. I must have stood there for 10 minutes, just staring at those words. Reading them over and over, like maybe if I looked long enough they'd rearrange themselves into something innocent. A joke from one of his poker buddies. A receipt I was misreading. Anything but what it clearly was. I heard the shower turn off down the hall. Marcus was humming something, probably whatever song had been stuck in his head all day. He did that. It used to be one of the things I loved about him, how he'd unconsciously hum while doing everyday things. Now it made me want to scream. I shoved the note back in his pocket and hung the jacket where I'd found it, trying to make everything look normal. My reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. My face was pale, my eyes too wide. I looked like someone who'd just witnessed a crime. I guess in a way I had. Marcus came out of the bathroom with a towel wrapped around his waist, water still dripping from his hair. He was 42, but he'd kept himself in shape, still went to the gym 3 times a week. He smiled at me. That same easy smile I'd fallen in love with when I was 24 and thought I knew everything about the world. Marcus said, "Hey babe, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to throw the note in his face and demand answers. Instead, I heard myself say in this eerily calm voice, "Just tired. Long day with the kids." He crossed the room and kissed my forehead, and I had to fight every instinct not to pull away. He smelled like our soap, our shampoo, all the familiar scents of our shared life. But underneath it all, I could still smell that perfume. Marcus said, "Well, get some sleep. I've got an early meeting tomorrow anyway." I lay in bed next to him that night, staring at the ceiling while he snored softly beside me. The Marcus I knew, the man who cried when our daughter took her first steps, who made terrible dad jokes and coached Little League on weekends, he wouldn't do this. But the note in his jacket pocket said otherwise. The evidence was right there, written in purple ink. I must have dozed off around 4 because I woke to my alarm at 6:30, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Marcus's side of the bed was already empty. I could hear him downstairs, probably making his usual breakfast of black coffee and toast. I went through the motions of getting our kids ready for school. Emma was 8 and going through a phase where she wanted to wear mismatched socks. Tyler was 11 and thought showering was optional. Normal chaos. Normal morning. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Emma said, "Mommy, why are your eyes red?" I told her I hadn't slept well, which wasn't a lie. Tyler barely looked up from his cereal. Marcus kissed all 3 of us goodbye and headed out the door to catch his train. And I watched him go, wondering if this was the last normal morning we'd ever have. After I dropped the kids at school, I sat in the parking lot and pulled out my phone. My best friend Rachel had been telling me for years that I should trust my instincts more. I'd always brushed her off, said she was too suspicious, too quick to assume the worst. Now I wondered if she'd been right all along. I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Rachel said, "Aren't you supposed to be at work?" I told her I'd called in sick, which I had. Then I told her everything: the perfume, the note, the handwriting, the word daddy that made me feel sick to my stomach. She was quiet for a long moment. Then Rachel said, "Okay, first, breathe. Second, we need to figure out what's actually going on before you do anything drastic. Maybe it's not what it looks like." Even as she said it, I could tell she didn't believe her own words, but I appreciated the effort. Rachel said, "Do you want me to come over?" I did. I really did. But I shook my head even though she couldn't see me and told her no. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what to do next. I drove home in a daze, nearly running a red light. Our house looked exactly the same as when I'd left it, but it felt different now, like I was seeing it through new eyes. How many nights had Marcus come home late from work? How many business trips had he taken? How many times had I accepted his explanations without question because I trusted him, because that's what you do when you love someone? I spent the day going through everything. His emails, his phone records, his credit card statements. I felt disgusting doing it, like I was the one betraying our marriage by snooping. But that note kept flashing through my mind. "Thanks for last night, Daddy." His email was clean. Too clean, actually. There were work emails, spam, newsletters, but nothing personal. No love notes, no suspicious exchanges. His phone records showed calls to his office, to me, to his parents, to his brother. Normal stuff. The credit card statements showed lunches at places near his office, gas, groceries. Nothing that screamed affair. Either he was innocent or he was very, very careful. I found myself in our bedroom again, staring at his jacket. The note was still there in the pocket, physical proof that I hadn't imagined it. I took it out and photographed it with my phone, then put it back. Evidence, I thought, in case I needed it. The next few days were torture. I watched Marcus like a hawk, looking for any sign of guilt, any crack in his facade. But he was just Marcus. He complained about his boss, helped Tyler with his math homework, asked me how my day was. He reached for my hand when we watched TV. He kissed me goodnight. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the note was old, from before we got married. Maybe it was someone else's jacket and he'd picked it up by mistake. The explanations got more and more ridiculous as I tried to convince myself that my marriage wasn't falling apart. Then, exactly 1 week after I found the note, Marcus told me he had to work late. "A big presentation," he said. "Might not be home until 10 or 11. I nodded and smiled and told him no problem. I'd save him some dinner. But the moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I called Rachel. I told her, "Tonight's the night. I'm following him." Rachel said, "Are you sure? Maybe you should just talk to him. Ask him directly." But I couldn't. Because if I asked and he lied to my face, I didn't know if I could handle it. I needed to know the truth first. Rachel said, "Then I'm coming with you. You're not doing this alone." She showed up 20 minutes later in her beat-up Honda, wearing all black like we were going on some kind of covert mission. Under any other circumstances, it would have been funny. Rachel said, "I've got a full tank of gas and a thermos of coffee. Let's go catch this bastard." We parked down the street from Marcus's office building and waited. My stomach was in knots. Part of me hoped he'd come out alone, get on the train, and prove me wrong about everything. The other part of me needed confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right. At 7:15, Marcus emerged from the building, but he didn't head toward the train station. He walked 2 blocks east and ducked into a small Italian restaurant I'd never heard of. Rachel said, "Do we go in?" I shook my head. We waited. 15 minutes passed. 20. I was starting to think maybe it really was a work dinner when I saw her. She couldn't have been more than 25. Long dark hair, tight dress, heels that probably cost more than my car payment. She walked into the restaurant like she owned the place. Rachel grabbed my hand and squeezed. She said, "We still don't know for sure. Maybe she's a colleague." But I knew. I could feel it in my bones. We sat there for 2 hours, watching the restaurant entrance. When Marcus and the woman finally emerged, they weren't touching, but they were standing close. Too close. He said something that made her laugh, throwing her head back. Then she stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek before walking away. I thought I'd cry. I thought I'd scream. Instead, I just felt numb. Rachel said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so..." So sorry. Marcus headed toward the train station. Rachel drove me home in silence. I thanked her and went inside to an empty house. The kids were at my sister's for the night, something we'd arranged earlier in the week. It was supposed to be a date night for Marcus and me. Instead, I sat in the dark living room and waited for my husband to come home from cheating on me. He walked in at 10:45, exactly when he said he would. He looked tired, but not guilty. That was the part that hurt the most, how easily he could slip back into the role of faithful husband. Marcus said, "Sorry I'm so late." The presentation ran long, and then we grabbed dinner to debrief. We, not I, we. I asked him who we was, keeping my voice steady. Marcus said, "Oh, just me and a few people from the team. Boring work stuff." The lie came so easily to him. No hesitation, no tells. How long had he been doing this? I stood up and walked over to where he'd hung his jacket. I reached into the pocket and pulled out the note, the one I'd been carrying around for a week like a talisman of my unraveling life. I said, "Who is she?" Marcus's face went white. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I said it again, louder this time. "Who is she, Marcus? Who's the woman you had dinner with tonight? Who wrote you this note? Who calls you daddy?" He sat down heavily on the couch, his head in his hands. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then Marcus said, "Her name is Veronica. She's a paralegal at the firm. It's been going on for 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies and betrayal. Half a year of him coming home to our family, kissing our children goodnight, making love to me, all while he was with someone else. I asked him why, but my voice broke on the word. Marcus said, "I don't know. I don't have a good answer. She made me feel young again. Exciting. Like I was more than just some middle-aged guy with a mortgage and a minivan. It didn't mean anything. I actually laughed at that. It was either laugh or completely fall apart. I said, "It didn't mean anything? You've been sleeping with a woman half your age for 6 months and it didn't mean anything? Do I mean anything? Do our kids mean anything?" Marcus looked up at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Of course you do. You're everything. This was just a stupid mistake." I told him to get out. He tried to argue, tried to say we should talk about it, go to counseling, work it out. But I couldn't look at him anymore. I couldn't be in the same room with him. I said, "Get out of my house. Go stay with your brother, go stay in a hotel, I don't care. But you can't be here right now." He left. I heard his car start, heard him drive away, and then I was alone in the house we'd bought together, surrounded by pictures of our happy family, and I finally let myself cry. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the trust that was broken. I cried for my kids who were going to have to learn that their father wasn't the hero they thought he was. I cried until I had nothing left. And then I lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. Rachel came over the next morning with coffee and donuts and found me still on the couch, probably looking like death warmed over. She said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to shower, I'm going to make some calls, and we're going to figure this out step by step." I asked her what there was to figure out. My husband cheated. It was over. Rachel said, "Nothing's over until you decide it's over. I'm not saying you should take him back. I'm saying you need to make decisions from a place of strength, not from grief. So shower, eat something. Then we'll talk." I did what she said because I didn't have the energy to argue. The hot water felt good, washing away the tears and the sleepless night. When I came out, Rachel had made eggs and toast and forced me to eat. Then she said, "Have you talked to a lawyer?" I hadn't even thought that far ahead. A lawyer meant divorce, meant making this real and permanent. But what was the alternative? Pretending it never happened? Trying to rebuild trust with someone who'd lied to my face for 6 months? Rachel gave me the name of her cousin who did family law. I called and made an appointment for Monday. It was Friday. I had the whole weekend to figure out what I was going to tell the kids. My sister brought them home that afternoon. Emma ran in asking about Daddy. Where was Daddy? She wanted to show him the drawing she'd made. Tyler was quieter, more observant. He looked at me, and I could tell he knew something was wrong. I told them Daddy had to go away for work for a few days. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but they were too young for the truth. At least the whole truth. That would come later, when I'd figured out how to explain it without destroying their image of their father completely. Marcus texted me constantly that weekend, saying he was sorry, that he loved me, that he'd do anything to fix this. Each message made me angrier. Where was this commitment to our marriage when he was taking Veronica to dinner? When he was letting her call him daddy? On Sunday night, Emma climbed into my bed asking when daddy was coming home. I held her tight and told her soon, knowing it was another lie. Tyler stood in the doorway watching us, and I saw something in his eyes that looked a lot like understanding. My 11-year-old son was putting the pieces together faster than I wanted him to. Monday morning, I met with a lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she was no-nonsense and efficient. She asked me questions I didn't want to answer, about finances and assets and custody. She explained my options, what divorce would look like, how to protect myself and my kids. Walking out of that office, I felt like I was stepping into a new life I'd never wanted. Single mother, divorcee, another statistic. But I also felt something else. A tiny spark of something that might have been strength. I started making changes, small ones at first. I opened my own bank account, one Marcus didn't have access to. I started transferring money, building a safety net. I documented everything, kept records, prepared for the worst. Marcus kept texting. Then he started showing up at the house, begging to talk. I'd see him sitting in his car outside, waiting. It was pathetic and infuriating, and a small part of me that I hated felt sorry for him. 2 weeks after I kicked him out, he caught me in the driveway as I was leaving for the grocery store. Marcus said, "Please, just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain." I looked at him. He'd lost weight. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Good, I thought. I told him he had 5 minutes. Marcus said, "I ended it with Veronica the night you found out. I told her it was over, that I'd made a terrible mistake. I've started seeing a therapist. I'm trying to understand why I did this, how I could have been so stupid and selfish. I love you. I love our family. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm begging you for one anyway." I asked him if he loved her. He shook his head emphatically and said, "No, it was never about love. It was about ego and feeling desired and being incredibly, unforgivably stupid." I asked him if this was the first time. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Marcus said, "There was someone else. 3 years ago. It lasted a month. I swore I'd never do it again. 3 years ago. When I was pregnant with Emma. When I was dealing with morning sickness and swollen ankles and feeling like a whale. He'd been sleeping with someone else. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the driveway. I made it 2 blocks before I had to pull over because I couldn't see through the tears. That night, I told the kids. Not everything, but enough. That Mommy and Daddy were having some problems. That Daddy was going to be living somewhere else for a while. That it wasn't their fault. That we both loved them very much. Emma cried. Tyler was silent, his jaw tight. Then he said, "Is Daddy coming back?" I told him I didn't know, which was the truth. The next few months were a blur of lawyers and arguments and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the kids. Marcus wanted to fight for joint custody. He wanted counseling, wanted to save the marriage. I wanted him to sign the papers and let me move on. But moving on was harder than I thought. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies, part of me still loved him. Part of me remembered the man I married, the man who held my hand in the delivery room, who danced with me in the kitchen, who knew how I took my coffee and could make me laugh when I was stressed. That's the thing they don't tell you about betrayal. It's not clean. You can't just stop loving someone because they hurt you. The heart doesn't work that way. I started going to therapy myself. Dr. Chen was patient and kind and never told me what to do, just helped me work through my feelings. The anger, the grief, the confusion, the guilt that somehow this was my fault, that if I'd been thinner or prettier or more exciting, Marcus wouldn't have strayed. Dr. Chen said, "His choices are not a reflection of your worth. They're a reflection of his character, his issues, his failings. You didn't make him cheat. He made that choice." But knowing that intellectually and believing it emotionally were 2 different things. My first few therapy sessions were brutal. I'd walk into Dr. Chen's office thinking I had myself together, and within 5 minutes, I'd be sobbing into a box of tissues. She never rushed me, never looked uncomfortable with my tears. She'd just sit there, patient and calm, waiting for me to find my words. In one session, about a month after I kicked Marcus out, I told her about a dream I kept having. In the dream, I was searching for Marcus in a crowded train station. I could see him in the distance, but every time I got close, he'd disappear into the crowd. I'd wake up with my heart racing, feeling abandoned all over again. Dr. Chen asked me, "What do you think the dream is telling you?" I wiped my eyes and said, "That I can't catch him. That he's always going to be just out of reach." She nodded thoughtfully and said, "Or maybe it's telling you that you're still chasing something that's already gone. The Marcus you're looking for in that dream, the faithful husband, he doesn't exist. He never did. You were married to a man who was capable of betrayal, who chose to betray you. The question is, when will you stop chasing the fantasy and accept the reality?" Her words stung, but they also rang true. I'd been mourning a man who never existed, a marriage that was built on a foundation I hadn't known was cracked. The hardest part about those early months wasn't the big dramatic moments. It was the small, everyday things. Like Saturday mornings when I'd automatically make 2 cups of coffee before remembering I was alone, or reaching for my phone to text Marcus something funny Tyler said, then stopping myself, or lying in bed at night, unused to having all that space to myself. I started journaling, something Dr. Chen suggested. At first, I resisted. It felt too stereotypical, too self-helpy. But one night, unable to sleep, I grabbed a notebook and just started writing. Everything I couldn't say out loud, all the rage and hurt and confusion, it poured out onto the pages. I wrote about the first time Marcus and I met, at a friend's barbecue. How he'd made me laugh so hard I'd snorted, and instead of being embarrassed, he'd said it was the cutest thing he'd ever heard. I wrote about our wedding day, how nervous he was during his vows, his hands shaking as he slipped the ring on my finger. I wrote about the birth of our children, how he'd held my hand through every contraction, whispering that I was the strongest person he knew. And then I wrote about the lies, the late nights at the office that were probably dinner with Veronica, the business trips that maybe weren't all business, the times he'd come home and kissed me, made love to me, all while thinking about someone else. The journal became a place where I could be completely honest, even about the things I was ashamed to admit. Like the fact that sometimes I missed him so much it physically hurt, or that I'd driven past his brother's house one night, just to see if his car was there, or that I'd looked up Veronica on social media, torturing myself with pictures of this young, beautiful woman who'd stolen my husband. Rachel caught me doing that one night when she came over unannounced with wine and takeout. She took the phone out of my hand and said, "Stop. You're only hurting yourself." I protested, trying to grab the phone back, but she held it away from me and said, "She's not better than you. She's not prettier or smarter or more worthy. She's just younger, and she was there when Marcus was having whatever midlife crisis he was having. That's it. That's all it was." I asked her how she could be so sure. Rachel sat down next to me and said, "Because I know you. And I know that you are one of the strongest, kindest, most incredible women I've ever met. Marcus cheating on you doesn't change that. It just proves that he's an idiot who didn't appreciate what he had." I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. Other days I couldn't stop comparing myself to Veronica. She was probably in her mid-20s, no stretch marks, no gray hair, no exhaustion from years of raising children and maintaining a household. She could probably stay out late without worrying about who was going to make school lunches in the morning. She didn't have the weight of 14 years of marriage on her shoulders. Dr. Chen and I talked a lot about comparison in our sessions. She helped me understand that I was comparing my behind the scenes to Veronica's highlight reel. I was comparing my reality, complete with morning breath and mom jeans and the stress of everyday life, to some fantasy version of what Marcus's relationship with her must have been like. Dr. Chen said, "Affairs exist in a bubble. They're all excitement and novelty, and none of the mundane reality of real relationships." She didn't have to deal with Marcus when he had the flu, or when he was stressed about work, or when he left his dirty socks on the floor. She got the version of him that he wanted to present. That's not real life. I knew she was right, but it didn't make it hurt less. Meanwhile, the practical realities of separation were setting in. I had to figure out how to manage the household finances on my own. Marcus was paying child support and half the mortgage, but it was still tight. I started looking at my budget, cutting expenses where I could. The luxuries we'd taken for granted, eating out a few times a week, impromptu shopping trips, they had to go. Emma noticed. She asked me one day why we couldn't go to her favorite restaurant anymore. I explained that we were being more careful with money right now. She accepted it with the easy resilience of children, but it broke my heart a little. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for my kids. Tyler was struggling more than Emma, though he tried to hide it. His grades started slipping. His teacher called me in for a conference, concerned about his behavior. He'd been acting out in class, getting into fights with other students. I sat across from his teacher, Mrs. Morrison, feeling like a failure. She was kind, but direct. Mrs. Morrison said, "I know Tyler's parents are going through a separation. This is common behavior for children dealing with family upheaval. He's angry and he doesn't know how to express it appropriately." I asked her what I should do. She suggested family counseling, specifically for Tyler, a safe space where he could talk about his feelings. I made an appointment that same day. Tyler's first session with his counselor, a soft-spoken man named David, was hard to watch. I sat in the waiting room, listening to the muffled sound of my son's voice through the door, and felt like I'd failed him in every possible way. When he came out, his eyes were red, but he seemed calmer. David asked to speak with me privately for a few minutes. David said, "Tyler is carrying a lot of anger. He's angry at his father for leaving, angry at you for making him leave, angry at himself for not being able to fix it. He needs reassurance that the divorce isn't his fault, and that both his parents still love him." I told David that we'd both told him that repeatedly. David nodded and said, "I know, but kids need to hear it over and over. They need it demonstrated through consistency and presence. Tyler needs to know that even though his family structure is changing, he's still safe and loved." I committed to doing whatever Tyler needed. We established a routine. Weekly sessions with David, regular check-ins where I'd ask him about his feelings, even when he insisted he was fine. Special one-on-one time, just the two of us, doing things he enjoyed. Slowly, I started to see improvement. Tyler's outbursts became less frequent. His grades stabilized. He started talking to me more, sharing little things about his day instead of shutting down. One night, about 4 months after Marcus left, Tyler came into my room at bedtime. He stood in the doorway, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Tyler said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" I patted the bed next to me and he sat down. He asked, "Are you and Dad ever going to get back together?" I'd been dreading this question, but I owed him honesty. I told him, "I don't know, buddy. Right now, Dad and I are both working on ourselves. We're trying to be the best parents we can be for you and Emma. Whether that means we get back together or stay apart, I can't say. But what I can promise is that we both love you more than anything in the world." Tyler was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he said, "I'm mad at Dad." I pulled him close and said, "I know. I am too. And that's okay. You're allowed to be angry. But try to remember that Dad is still your dad. He made a big mistake, but he loves you." Tyler nodded against my shoulder and said, "I just wish things could go back to normal." I kissed the top of his head and said, "Me too, baby. Me too." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I meant it. Did I really want to go back to a marriage where I was constantly wondering if my husband was being faithful? Did I want to model that relationship for my children? As the weeks turned into months, I started to find a new rhythm. The sharp, constant pain of betrayal dulled into something more manageable. I still had bad days where I'd cry in the shower or lie awake at night replaying every moment of our marriage, looking for signs I'd missed. But I also had good days where I felt almost okay. I threw myself into self-improvement, not to win Marcus back, but for myself. I started taking better care of my health. I joined a gym, not because I wanted to lose weight to compete with Veronica, but because exercise helped with my anxiety. I'd go running early in the morning before the kids woke up, and those runs became my meditation time. Just me, my thoughts, and the rhythmic sound of my feet hitting the pavement. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during the marriage. Women I'd known in college, former coworkers, neighbors I'd only exchanged pleasantries with. I started saying yes to invitations instead of defaulting to no because I was tired or because I needed to be home for Marcus. One of those friends, Christine, invited me to join her book club. I hesitated at first. The idea of sitting in a room full of women, many of whom probably had stable marriages, felt daunting. But Rachel encouraged me to go. Rachel said, "You need community." You need to be around people who aren't me or your therapist. You need to remember that you're more than just a woman going through a divorce. So I went. The book club met monthly at a wine bar downtown. The first night, I almost turned around and went home 3 times. But I forced myself to walk in, find the group, and introduce myself. The women were welcoming and funny and completely unconcerned with my marital status. We talked about the book, argued about the characters' motivations, laughed at the ridiculous plot twists. For 2 hours, I wasn't a betrayed wife or a struggling single mother. I was just a woman having an intelligent conversation about literature and drinking wine. Afterwards, Christine walked me to my car. She said, "I'm glad you came. You should come to yoga with me next week too." I started to make an excuse, but she cut me off. Christine said, "I know you're going through a hard time. I went through a divorce 5 years ago. It nearly destroyed me. But you know what helped? Showing up. Building a life outside of the pain. You don't have to have it all figured out, you just have to keep moving forward." I agreed to yoga. Then I agreed to a hiking group. Then to a pottery class that Emma wanted to take, and we went together. Slowly, piece by piece, I was building a new life. Not the life I'd planned, not the future I'd imagined when I married Marcus, but something else. Something that was beginning to feel like it might be mine. Dr. Chen noticed the change in our sessions. She said, "You seem different, lighter." I thought about it and said, "I think I'm starting to accept that this is my reality now. I'm not waiting for my old life to come back. I'm creating a new one." She smiled and said, "That's real growth. The first step to healing isn't forgetting what happened or even forgiving it. It's accepting it and choosing to move forward anyway." But moving forward didn't mean the pain was gone. There were still triggers everywhere. A song on the radio that had been our wedding song, couples holding hands at the grocery store, Father's Day, when I had to watch Tyler make a card for Marcus and pretend my heart wasn't breaking. And there were the practical complications of co-parenting with someone I could barely stand to look at. We had to coordinate schedules, discuss school events, make decisions about the kids' healthcare and education. Every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. Marcus tried to be friendly, tried to make small talk during pickups and drop-offs. I kept it strictly business. I didn't want to hear about his day or his therapy breakthroughs or how sorry he was. I wanted to get through the exchange and move on with my life. But Tyler and Emma loved their father, despite everything. They'd come back from weekends at his place full of stories about what they'd done together. It was complicated, feeling grateful that he was being a good father to them, while simultaneously resenting that he'd destroyed our family. Rachel listened to me vent about it over lunch one day. I said, "How am I supposed to feel? I want him to be a good dad, but every time the kids come home happy from his place, it's like a reminder of what we lost, of what he threw away." Rachel took a sip of her coffee and said, "You're allowed to have complicated feelings. You don't have to choose between hating him and wanting him to be a good father. Both things can be true at the same time." That became my mantra. Both things can be true. I could be angry at Marcus and want what was best for our children. I could be healing and still have bad days. I could be building a new life and still grieve the old one. About 5 months into the separation, Emma had a school play. She was playing a tree in the school's production of Peter Pan, and she was so excited she could barely contain herself. Of course, that meant both Marcus and I would be there, sitting in the same audience, watching our daughter together. I got there early to save seats. Marcus arrived just as the lights were dimming. He sat down next to me, and for 90 minutes, we watched our daughter stand on stage with her arms stretched out like branches, the biggest smile on her face. When it was over and we went backstage to congratulate her, Emma threw her arms around both of us. Emma said, "Did you see me? Did you see how still I stood?" We both assured her she was the best tree anyone had ever seen. For a moment, standing there with Marcus and both our kids, we almost looked like a normal family. Almost. Tyler noticed it too. On the drive home, he said, "It was nice having both you and Dad there." I agreed, keeping my eyes on the road and my emotions in check. Tyler continued, "Do you think you guys will ever be able to be friends again?" I'd been asking myself the same question. Could Marcus and I ever get to a place where we weren't just civil for the kids' sake, but actually friendly? Did I even want that? I told Tyler, "I don't know, but I hope someday we can at least be friendly. For you guys." That night, after the kids were in bed, I got a text from Marcus. It said, "Thank you for today." for making it easy for Emma to enjoy her moment without worrying about us. You're an amazing mother. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to maintain the wall I'd built between us. But another part of me, the part that was trying to heal and grow, recognized that he was trying too. I wrote back, she deserved to have both her parents there. She was a great tree. It was a small exchange, but it felt significant. Like maybe we could find a way to navigate this new relationship, whatever it looked like. 3 months after I kicked Marcus out, we were sitting in a mediator's office trying to hammer out custody arrangements. We'd agreed to split time with the kids 50-50, weekends would rotate, holidays would be divided. It was all very civilized and completely heartbreaking. As we were leaving, Marcus caught my arm and said, "Can we talk? Just the two of us?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. We went to a coffee shop near the mediator's office, the kind of place we might have gone on a date years ago. Marcus said, "I know I've lost your trust. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that walking away from our marriage is the biggest regret of my life. Not the affair, because that was just stupidity, but throwing away 14 years with you for 6 months of nothing. That's what kills me." I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into the dark liquid, and said, "You didn't just throw away 14 years. You threw away every future year we could have had. You threw away growing old together, watching our kids graduate and get married, becoming grandparents together. You threw away forever for the ego boost of some 25-year-old calling you daddy." Marcus flinched like I'd hit him, but he nodded and said, "You're right, and I have to live with that. But I'm asking you, is there any chance, any possibility that someday you might be able to forgive me? Not today, maybe not for years, but someday." I looked at him across the table, this man I'd loved for so long, and I realized I didn't know the answer to that question. The anger was still there, hot and fierce. But so was the grief for what we'd lost, and underneath it all, buried deep, was a tiny seed of something that might have been hope. I told him I didn't know, which seemed to be my answer to everything these days. The divorce papers sat on my kitchen table for 2 weeks before I signed them. Every time I picked up the pen, I'd think about Emma's laugh, Tyler's smile, the family photos on the wall. I'd think about the life we'd built and whether it was worth salvaging or if too much damage had been done. Rachel came over one night and found me staring at the papers for the 100th time. She said, "You know what you need to do? You need to figure out what you want. Not what's best for the kids, not what Marcus wants, not what I think or what your therapist thinks. What do you want?" I realized I'd been so focused on being angry, on being hurt, on managing everyone else's feelings, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself that question. What did I want? I wanted to not wake up every morning with a knot in my stomach. I wanted to trust my partner completely. I wanted to feel desired and cherished, and like I was enough. I wanted my kids to grow up seeing what real love looked like, not watching their parents go through the motions. But I also wanted the impossible. I wanted to go back in time and prevent this from happening. I wanted the Marcus I thought I had, the faithful husband who would never betray me. And since I couldn't have that, I had to decide if I could accept the Marcus who actually existed, flaws and all. Dr. Chen asked me in our next session, "Can you imagine forgiving him?" I told her I didn't know. The betrayal felt too big, too deep. She said, "Then let me ask you this. Can you imagine your life without him in it? Not co-parenting, but truly apart. Moving on, maybe eventually with someone else. Watching him move on too. Can you see that future?" And that's when it hit me. I could. I could absolutely see that future. It scared me, but it didn't destroy me. Maybe that meant I was stronger than I thought. Or maybe it meant our marriage had been dying long before Veronica came into the picture, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. That night, I signed the papers. It felt like stepping off a cliff, not knowing if I'd fall or fly. But it also felt like taking control of my own story instead of letting Marcus's choices define me. The next 6 months were a weird kind of limbo. We weren't together, but we weren't fully apart. We shared custody of the kids, showed up to their school events, coordinated schedules. We were polite but distant, like friendly acquaintances instead of two people who'd shared a bed for 14 years. Marcus continued therapy. He'd tell me about it during drop-offs, how he was working through his issues with his father, with aging, with feeling invisible. I listened, but I didn't engage. It wasn't my job to fix him anymore. I focused on myself and the kids. I went back to school part-time, something I'd always wanted to do. I started running in the mornings, joined a book club, reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with over the years. I was building a life that was mine, not ours. Then, about 8 months after I kicked him out, Marcus showed up at the house on a Saturday morning. It wasn't his weekend with the kids. He said, "I have something to show you. Will you come with me?" I should have said no. I had a million things to do. But there was something in his voice, something vulnerable and hopeful, that made me curious. I got in his car and we drove in silence to a part of town I didn't recognize. He pulled up in front of a small house with a bright blue door. Marcus said, "I bought it last week. It's mine. I'm not living with my brother anymore, not crashing in hotels. I have a home, a place where the kids can have their own rooms when they stay with me. I wanted you to see it." He showed me around. It was modest but nice. He'd already set up bedrooms for Emma and Tyler, filled them with their favorite things. The kitchen was small but functional. The living room had a couch and a TV and not much else. It looked like a fresh start. Marcus said, "I know this doesn't fix anything. I know buying a house doesn't make up for what I did. But I wanted you to see that I'm building a life too. A better one. The kind of life our kids can be proud of." I looked at him standing in his new kitchen, in his new life, and I saw someone different from the man I'd married. He was older, more weathered, but there was also a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a humility born from loss. I told him it was a nice house, that the kids would love it. Then I went home to my own life, the one I was building piece by piece. A year after I found that note in Marcus's pocket, I was standing in Emma's school watching her in the holiday pageant. She was singing her little heart out, dressed as a reindeer with antlers that kept slipping. Tyler was sitting next to me, growing so fast I could barely keep up. Marcus was on my other side, recording everything on his phone. To anyone watching, we might have looked like a normal family. And maybe we were. Just a different kind of normal. After the show, we all went out for ice cream. It was Emma's idea. She wanted both of us there, didn't want to choose. So we sat in the little ice cream parlor, eating sundaes and listening to our kids chatter about their friends and their teachers and everything that mattered in their 8 and 11-year-old worlds. Marcus caught my eye across the table and smiled, tentative and hopeful. I smiled back, not because I'd forgiven him, not because we were getting back together, but because in that moment, we were doing right by our kids. Later that night, after I'd tucked Emma and Tyler into bed, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the grief, the anger, the slow, painful process of putting myself back together. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the one who defined herself by her marriage, who thought her worth was tied to being someone's wife. That woman had been shattered by Marcus's betrayal. But maybe she'd needed to be. Because the woman I was now, she was stronger. She knew her value wasn't dependent on whether someone chose to cherish it. She'd learned that she could survive heartbreak, that she could raise her kids on her own, that she could build a life that was fulfilling and meaningful without a partner. Had I forgiven Marcus? I still didn't know. Some days the anger was so fresh it felt like it had just happened yesterday. Other days, I felt nothing but a dull ache for what we'd lost, but I'd forgiven myself. For not seeing the signs earlier, for staying as long as I did. For all the times I'd made myself smaller to make him feel bigger. I'd forgiven myself for being human and imperfect, and doing the best I could with what I knew at the time. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Just a thank you for letting him be part of the evening, for making it easy for the kids. I read it and put my phone away without responding. I didn't owe him my time or my energy beyond what we needed for the kids. Rachel called a few minutes later and asked me how I was doing. Really doing, not the polite answer I gave everyone else. I told her I was okay. Not great, not terrible, just okay. And that felt like progress. She said, "You know what I'm proud of? You didn't let this break you. You could have become bitter and angry and closed off. But you're still you, still kind, still open, still believing in love even after everything." I wasn't sure I believed in love anymore. At least not the fairy tale version I'd grown up thinking was real. But I believed in myself. I believed in my ability to heal, to grow, to become something more than my pain. Over the next few months, I started dating. Nothing serious, just coffee here and there with men Rachel set me up with, or guys I met through friends. It felt strange, being back in the dating world after so many years. I'd forgotten how to flirt, how to make small talk with strangers, how to decide if there was chemistry. Most of the dates were forgettable. Nice guys, boring conversations, no spark. But it felt good to be seen as desirable again, as a woman in my own right instead of just someone's ex-wife. My first date was with a guy named Andrew. Rachel had insisted I needed to just rip the Band-Aid off and get back out there. Andrew was a friend of her husband's, recently divorced himself. We met at a coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon. I spent an hour getting ready, trying on 5 different outfits before settling on jeans and a sweater. I felt ridiculous, like a teenager getting ready for prom. But I was also nervous in a way I hadn't been in years. What if I'd forgotten how to do this? What if I said something stupid? What if he took one look at me and regretted agreeing to this? Andrew was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table. He stood when he saw me, smiled, and extended his hand. We shook hands awkwardly, both of us clearly unsure of the protocol. The conversation was stilted at first. We talked about work, about the weather, about Rachel and her husband, safe topics. But then he asked me about my divorce, and I found myself being more honest than I'd intended. I told him about finding the note, about the betrayal, about trying to rebuild my life. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, Andrew said, "I know how you feel. My ex-wife had an affair with my business partner, lost my marriage and my company in one fell swoop. We spent the next 2 hours swapping divorce war stories, laughing at the absurdity of it all. It felt therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. Here was someone who truly understood what I was going through." Andrew walked me to my car afterwards. He said, "I had a really nice time. Would you want to do this again?" I surprised myself by saying yes. We went on 3 more dates over the next month. Dinner, a movie, a walk in the park. He was kind and attentive, and there was absolutely zero chemistry between us. By the 4th date, we both knew it. Andrew said, "You're wonderful, but I don't think this is going anywhere romantic, is it?" I felt relieved rather than disappointed. I said, "No, I don't think so, but I really enjoyed getting to know you." We parted as friends, and honestly, that felt like a win. I'd put myself out there, survived the experience, and came away with a new friend who understood my situation. Rachel was less impressed. She said, "You need to go out with someone who actually excites you, someone who makes your heart race a little." I laughed and said, "My heart racing sounds exhausting. I'm good with boring right now." But she was persistent. She set me up with her yoga instructor, a guy named Michael who was attractive in that intense, too healthy way. He spent our entire dinner talking about his chakras and his Ayurvedic diet. I smiled and nodded, and knew by the appetizer that this was going nowhere. Then there was David, who seemed promising until he spent 20 minutes explaining why his ex-wife was crazy and how all his relationship problems were her fault. Red flag city. And Richard, who was perfectly nice but talked about his mother so much, I started to wonder if he was actually looking for a replacement for her rather than a girlfriend. After Richard, I told Rachel I was taking a break from dating. Rachel protested, but I was firm. I said, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not ready. These dates just make me feel more alone than being actually alone does." She sighed and said, "Okay, but promise me you won't close yourself off completely. When the right person comes along, you need to be open to it." I promised, though I privately doubted the right person existed. Or if he did, I doubted I'd recognize him. My picker was clearly broken. I'd chosen Marcus after all, and look how that turned out. Instead of dating, I focused on other things. I enrolled in a creative writing class at the community college, something I'd always wanted to do. The instructor was a published author who encouraged us to write from our pain, to transform our experiences into art. I started writing short stories. Most of them were thinly veiled autobiographical pieces about betrayal and healing. But putting my feelings into narrative form was cathartic. I shared some of them in class, and the feedback from my classmates was encouraging. One woman, Barbara, approached me after class one night. She said, "Your story about the woman finding the note, that really resonated with me. My husband left me for his secretary 20 years ago. I thought I'd never recover. But here I am, 2 decades later, happily remarried with grandchildren. It gets better. I promise it gets better. Her words gave me hope. If she could survive and thrive after betrayal, maybe I could too. I also started volunteering at Tyler's school, helping with the after-school tutoring program. It felt good to be useful, to help other kids who were struggling. One of the students I worked with, a quiet boy named Marcus, ironically, reminded me so much of Tyler. He was dealing with his parents' divorce and acting out academically. I worked with him twice a week, helping him with his math homework, but also just talking. He opened up to me about his anger, his confusion, his fear that his parents' divorce was somehow his fault. I told him, "It's not your fault. Adults make their own choices, good and bad. Your parents' problems with each other have nothing to do with how much they love you." Helping him helped me too. It reminded me that Tyler and Emma would survive this. Kids were resilient. As long as they had love and support, they'd be okay. My writing class culminated in a reading at a local bookstore. Each student could share one piece. I chose a story about a woman who finds her strength after her husband's betrayal. Standing in front of a room of strangers, reading my words out loud, I felt exposed but also powerful. When I finished, the audience applauded. Several people came up to me afterwards to tell me how moved they were by the story. An older gentleman said, "My daughter is going through something similar. Would you mind if I shared your story with her?" I told him of course, and gave him my email address. That night, I got a message from his daughter, thanking me for putting into words what she'd been feeling. We started corresponding, two strangers bonded by similar pain, encouraging each other through our respective journeys. It was around this time that I started thinking seriously about going back to school. I dropped out of college when I got pregnant with Tyler, planning to go back later. Later never came. But now, with the kids getting older and more independent, maybe it was time. I met with an academic advisor at the local university. She helped me figure out how many credits I had, what I'd need to finish my degree. It would take 2 years, going part-time. 2 years felt both impossibly long and surprisingly doable. I enrolled for the spring semester. 2 classes, both in the evenings when Marcus could watch the kids. English literature and psychology. I was terrified the first day, surrounded by students barely older than Tyler. But the professors were welcoming, and I quickly discovered that my life experience gave me perspectives the younger students didn't have. In my psychology class, we studied attachment theory and relationship dynamics. It was like holding up a mirror to my marriage with Marcus. I could see all the patterns we'd fallen into, the ways we'd stopped really communicating, how we'd taken each other for granted. The professor, Dr. Williams, asked us to write a paper analyzing a significant relationship in our lives. I wrote about my marriage, about the slow erosion of intimacy that I'd been too busy to notice, about how betrayal was often the symptom rather than the disease. Dr. Williams gave me an A and wrote on my paper, "You have a gift for insight and articulation. Have you considered graduate school?" I hadn't. The idea felt absurd. Me, with my failed marriage and 2 kids and barely holding it together most days, going to graduate school. But the seed was planted. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to be present in the kids' lives. He never missed a scheduled visit, always showed up to school events, paid child support on time. He'd text me occasionally, asking how I was doing if there was anything I needed. I kept my responses brief but civil. Then, about 7 months after I'd kicked him out, he asked if we could meet for coffee. Not to talk about the kids, he said. To talk about us. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to go. What was there left to say? But Dr. Chen encouraged me to hear him out. She said, "Closure doesn't always look like a big dramatic moment. Sometimes it's just having a conversation where you can both be honest. You don't owe him anything, but you might owe it to yourself to listen." So I agreed to meet him. Same coffee shop where we'd sat months earlier, when he'd first asked for forgiveness. Then I met James at a work function. He was a consultant my company had brought in, smart and funny with kind eyes. We started talking about a project and ended up closing down the bar, just talking about everything and nothing. He asked me out to dinner. I said yes. We went to a small French restaurant and talked for hours. He told me about his divorce 5 years ago, how it had nearly destroyed him but ultimately made him a better person. I told him about Marcus, about the betrayal, about the slow process of rebuilding my life. James said, "You're incredibly brave. A lot of people wouldn't have had the strength to walk away, to start over." I didn't feel brave. Most days I felt like I was barely holding it together. But maybe that was what bravery was. Showing up even when you were scared, even when every instinct told you to hide. We started seeing each other regularly. James was patient and understanding, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. He met my kids after 3 months, just as a friend first. Tyler was skeptical, but Emma adored him immediately. Marcus found out I was seeing someone from the kids. I could see it hurt him, the idea of someone else in my life, potentially in our children's lives. But he didn't make a scene, didn't try to interfere. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. One night, about 6 months into my relationship with James, Marcus asked if we could talk. Really talk, not just about logistics and schedules. We met at that same coffee shop where we'd sat a year earlier. Marcus said, "I need to know. Is there any chance for us? I know I destroyed what we had, but could we build something new? I'm not the same person I was. I've done the work, faced my demons, learned from my mistakes. I still love you. I never stopped." I looked at him and felt a wave of sadness wash over me. Because I knew my answer, and it was going to hurt us both. I told him, "I'll always care about you. You're the father of my children, and we shared 14 years of our lives. But I can't go back. Not because I haven't forgiven you, though I'm still working on that, but because I've moved forward. I've built a new life, discovered who I am outside of being your wife, and I like her. I don't want to go back to being the woman who made herself small, who ignored red flags, who settled for less than she deserved." Marcus had tears in his eyes when he said, "Is it James? If he wasn't in the picture, would you feel differently?" I shook my head and said, "This isn't about James. This is about me. About choosing myself for the first time in a very long time. I hope you can understand that." He nodded, wiping at his eyes, and said, "I do. I hate it, but I do. You deserve happiness, even if it's not with me." We sat there for a while longer, drinking our coffee, talking about the kids, about memories from our marriage, the good ones this time, not the painful ending. There had been love there once, real and true. That was worth remembering, even if it hadn't been enough. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there and had finally set it down. The chapter with Marcus was truly closed now. No more what-ifs, no more maybes. Just acceptance of what was, and excitement for what could be. James was waiting for me when I got home. He'd offered to watch the kids so I could meet Marcus, never questioning or making me feel guilty about it. That's how I knew he was different. He trusted me, respected my past, and understood that healing wasn't linear. I told him about my conversation with Marcus, how I'd finally closed that door. James pulled me close and said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. Sad, for what was lost. Relieved to have clarity. Hopeful, for what's ahead. And grateful, for where I am right now. 2 years after finding that note in Marcus's jacket, I was standing in my sister's backyard at Emma's 10th birthday party. Both of my kids were running around with their friends, happy and healthy despite the upheaval their lives had been through. Marcus was there with his girlfriend, someone he'd been seeing for a few months. She seemed nice enough, good with the kids. I was genuinely happy for him. James stood beside me, his hand in mine, and I realized something. I'd spent so long thinking that Marcus's betrayal had broken me, had ruined my life. But looking around at my kids, my friends, this man who loved me without reservations, I saw the truth. It hadn't broken me. It had cracked me open. And through those cracks, I'd grown into someone stronger, someone more authentic, someone who knew her worth. Emma ran over and hugged my legs, looking up at me with chocolate cake smeared on her face, and said, "Mommy, this is the best birthday ever." I kissed the top of her head and agreed. It really was. That night, after everyone had gone home and the kids were asleep, I found myself standing in my bedroom, looking at the picture that still sat on my dresser. My wedding photo, Marcus and me, young and hopeful and certain we'd beat the odds. I'd kept it all this time, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of who I'd been, what I'd survived, how far I'd come. Tomorrow, I thought, I'd take it down. Not with anger or bitterness, but with peace. That chapter was over. A new one had begun. I thought about the woman who'd stood in this room 2 years ago, holding a jacket that smelled like perfume, finding a note that would change everything. If I could go back and talk to her, what would I say? I'd tell her it's going to hurt worse than anything she's ever experienced. That there will be days when getting out of bed feels impossible, when the weight of betrayal feels like it might crush her. I'd tell her she'll question everything about herself, her worth, her judgment, her future. But I'd also tell her this. She's stronger than she knows. She'll survive this. More than that, she'll grow from it. She'll discover parts of herself she never knew existed. She'll learn that her happiness doesn't depend on someone else's faithfulness. She'll build a life she's proud of, raise kids who are resilient and loving, and maybe even find love again when she's ready. I'd tell her that the note she's holding isn't the end of her story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. One where she's the author, the hero, the one who decides how it goes. Standing there in my bedroom, 2 years older and infinitely wiser, I finally understood what Dr. Chen had been trying to tell me all along. Marcus's betrayal wasn't about me. It was never about me not being enough. It was about him being broken in ways I couldn't fix, making choices I couldn't control. But my healing? That was all mine. Every step forward, every moment of strength, every decision to choose myself, that was my victory. Not over Marcus, not over Veronica, but over the voice in my head that said I wasn't worthy of better. I turned off the light and climbed into bed, my bed in my house in my life. James had asked me to think about moving in together, taking the next step. I wasn't ready yet, but I was considering it. Not because I needed him, but because I wanted to build something with him. There was a difference, and it mattered. My phone lit up with a text from Tyler. He was at Marcus's house for the weekend. The message said, "Good night, Mom. Love you." I smiled and typed back, "Love you too, baby. Sweet dreams." Then one from Emma, sent from Marcus's phone. A selfie of her and Tyler with silly filters on their faces, making me laugh out loud in the quiet darkness. This was my life now. Complicated, messy, unconventional, but authentically mine. I was a mother, a student, a girlfriend, a friend, a survivor. I was someone who'd been betrayed and broken and had put herself back together in a way that was somehow better than before. The note was still in my drawer, tucked away in an envelope. Sometimes I'd take it out and look at it, those 5 words in purple ink. "Thanks for last night, Daddy." They didn't make me cry anymore. They didn't fill me with rage. They were just a reminder of a turning point, the moment everything changed. But the change wasn't all bad. Yes, I'd lost a marriage. Yes, my kids had to deal with divorce. Yes, there were scars that would probably never fully heal. But I'd gained something too. Self-respect, independence, the knowledge that I could survive anything. I'd learned that love without trust is just a pretty facade. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from something that's hurting you, even if part of you still wants to hold on. That healing isn't a straight line. It's a messy spiral of progress and setbacks and small victories. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't determined by whether someone chose to honor their commitment to me. I was valuable, lovable, deserving of respect and fidelity, regardless of Marcus's choices. It took me a long time to believe that, but now I did. Now I knew it in my bones. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the future. Maybe James and I would work out long term. Maybe we wouldn't. Maybe I'd get remarried someday, or maybe I'd stay single and build a beautiful life on my own. I didn't know, and for the first time in my life, I was okay with that uncertainty. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. I could trust myself. To make good decisions, to recognize my worth, to walk away from what doesn't serve me, to embrace what does. I'd survived the worst betrayal I could imagine, and I'd come out the other side not just intact, but stronger. The woman who found that note 2 years ago was gone. In her place was someone I was proud to be. Someone who knew that she was enough, exactly as she was. Someone who understood that being loved was wonderful, but loving herself was essential. That note had shattered my world. But from those shattered pieces, I'd built something new. Something that was mine. Something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's choices or betrayals. I'd built myself. And that, I realized, was the real ending to my story. Not the divorce, not finding new love, not even forgiving Marcus. The real ending was me, standing in the wreckage of my old life, choosing to build something better, choosing myself. Finally, completely, unapologetically, choosing myself. The perfume had faded from that jacket long ago. The note was just paper and ink now, no longer a weapon that could hurt me. And I was just a woman who'd been tested and had discovered she was stronger than she ever imagined. I closed my eyes and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities. But tonight, I was at peace. I'd walked through fire and emerged transformed. Not unscathed, but undestroyed. Not unchanged, but not broken. I'd survived. I'd healed. I'd grown. And that was enough.